Welcome everyone to Chevalier's Books. We are the oldest indie bookstore in Los Angeles. This is actually, I believe, year 80 for us, of hopefully countless many more years to come. And tonight we are so psyched to be hosting Darin Strauss in conversation with Samantha Dunn for his new book, The Queen of Tuesday, pictured here. Samantha Dunn is the author of Sailing Paris, a finalist for the Penn West Fiction Award, and the memoir, Faith in Carlos Gomez. You may have read her essays before in the LA Times, O Magazine, Miss Magazine, Salon, and many more. She's doing us the great honor tonight of interrogating Darin Strauss on his new book. Darin is also the author of the best-selling novel Chang and Eng, and also the memoir Half a Life, winner of the National Book Critics Circle Award. His books have been honored in the past as the best book of the year by NPR, SF Chronicle, LA Times, Chicago Tribune, among many more. That being said, please give a warm digital welcome to Samantha Dunn and Darin Strauss.
Thank
Yay.
you. Yes, thank you for coming. I guess I'll just read for a little bit and then I'll talk to Sam. It's very nice to be here in my room, but also in Los Angeles with Sam, my very old friend and very favorite person. And I was going to say in Los Angeles, but one of my favorite people in the world. So it's very good to see her again. I'll just start. I guess I'll read a little bit about. I'll introduce the book. Well, first of all, can you hear me? I always hate readings anyway, but Zoom readings are like, I always say readings are death, and like a Zoom reading is like a mass murder. So, so no one's really excited to hear me read. So I'm going to read for a very short time, and then we'll just talk. But so the book is The Queen of Tuesday, and what was I going to say about it? It is a hybrid book. It's sort of partially a memoir, so it's a the story of my family, my grandfather and my grandmother, and it's the story of Lucille Ball. It's sort of it's a biography of her golden period, and then it's a fictional account of their sexual affair, which I invented. So I'm going to just read the second chapter, part of the second chapter. So all you need to know, I guess, is that Lucille and my grandfather met in the previous scene on Coney Island, and they had a kiss, which Desi doesn't know about. Desi is her husband. She's Lucille Ball. This is before she made it. She was actually facing down failure right before her television show, which then was the biggest success in the history of television. Neither New York nor Los Angeles, summer 1950. The woman is on the run from 40, but middle age evidently has quit the chase. 39 years old and she looks good. But does that help? It does not help much. How do you take defeat? The defeat of a life's ambition. Say you're a woman who's kept loyal to a studio, and that studio balled up your career and tossed it in the commode. And it's a world for men. Say you've been around a bit. How in this world for men does such a woman crab together a living? Lucille's sitting in a drugstore counter at Buffalo, New York, eating a butterscotch ice cream, and she wonders how firmly those Coney Island TV execs had recited their, I should say, also in Coney Island, she tried to convince CBS to give her a TV show. And they said no. How firmly those Coney Island TV execs had recited their expected lines. No, sorry, Mrs. Arnaz, just not for us. Okay then, fellas, but this is not goodbye. I promise we'll show you. Yes, but pretty or not, she's aware even now of the lines like tiny shark gills around her eyes. The radio's going at the top of its lungs, da-da-doo-doo, da-da, Les Brown and his band of renown. On Symphony Sid's nationally broadcast after hours swing session. Desi's at her side, talking. Tonight went good, went well, he says. Des is a grammarian when anxious. Uh-huh. Lucille's personal movie, her life film, sure doesn't seem like a Capra. It seems like a Douglas Sirk, soggy plotline and all. Come now, Red, Desi's saying. You don't think we made everybody feel fine? Symphony Sid, she thinks. A particularly New York specimen. One of those Jewish men goofy for jazz. Jewish men. Another thing I have to tell you is that my grandfather's Jewish, and she called him Hold On. That was her nickname for him, which is too complicated to get in here. Jewish men, she thinks. Hold On had sauntered up to her again at the end of the Coney Island night, after she'd thought they'd said goodbye, and it had been lovely, on the beach near the city in the rain. That encounter had been just a trifle, however, just something to make Desi jealous, she thinks, almost convincingly. The man's strongly coiling black hair, thick, brillantined, and his nose its hourglass-shaped bridge, certainly foreign, stirringly familiar. A Jew, all right, tall and handsome, if memory could be trusted, and thrilling. Not because he in any way was unusual, because he wasn't. Sometimes a woman just needed something different. A nice guy, human and refreshing and normal, but also trickily witty around the eyes. Hold On looked to her like a man who ruffled life on the head. And a whole year has rolled by. Enough inappropriate memory. Sure, sweetie, Lucille hears herself say. Well read, so then our plan might finally work. Desi swallows. But his smile is a guest who's forgotten to leave. Will it work? Lucille's face tightens a little. Why is ice cream so much better in places like this, she says, kind of sharply. Buffalo, he says, and nods and narrows his eyes in disbelief. Buffalo. The plan, the stupid plan. Months back, CBS, which hadn't wanted to sacrifice any of its radio properties, had been interested in repurposing Lucille's failed radio show, My Madcap Bride, for TV. Maybe that was the rumor anyway. TV, the mongrel new medium. Well, count her in. Even that flickering appliance beats unemployment. But of course, a problem. Bride's husband had been played by Richard Denning. Blonde hair, Gerber cheeks, middling charisma. Lucille liked Denning. She'd also planned to replace him. Not that Lucille, at that career moment, had much power to issue ultimatums, but working with her husband was the only chance she'd have to dust off her marriage, get it back on its feet. The Arnazes were often apart, frosty and thwarted. Desi would cheat to his heart's content, were Lucille to go off and film a show without him. She thought up a scheme then to have him at her side all the time. But CBS didn't think the public could. Hell, CBS execs themselves couldn't, except a redhead married to a Cuban. I'll stop there. I always find, again, it's so hard to read always, but in the Zoom call, you never know if anyone's still there. So, the book does go on to examine her fame and then fame itself and the birth of TV and also the birth of the suburbs, because my grandfather was there at the birth of the suburbs in New York City, which basically created the suburbs in America. And it's also, I think, I hope anyway, a great love story that examines whether love is obsession or is something different than that. So thank you for listening.
Yay.
Yeah.
I love that you're still as awkward as you were 20 years ago before you got famous. I love that about you, Darin. And I have to say,
the therapy isn't paid off.
No, not at all. It's just not that. It's a waste, dude.
It's a total waste.
It's a total waste. Listen, full disclosure, I have known Darin since he first waltzed up when I was sitting at a cafe with some friends in New York, and he was running his fingers through his then black hair. And he was trying to pitch a story on a boxer, and he didn't know where to pitch it. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
And I said, I know where you can pitch this. And a friendship was born. Anyway, and we've known each other since.
That was the first article I ever wrote. I wrote for Time Out New York. I interviewed Larry Holmes, the boxer.
That's right.
And then another story about a different boxer I met. And
That's
Sam
right.
was the big nonfiction writer that I had just met and wanted to pick her brain.
There we go. There we go.
I had long black hair.
You did. You had long black hair, and they were just a little bit of gray, and you had stomach, and you were like belting down Maalox. Do you remember that? You had stomach problem. Of course, you remember that.
Yeah, I
When
remember that.
you ended up, yeah, okay, anyway.
Yeah, it was 1997, so I was 6.
You were, right. And I was only 10 myself because I'm a little bit older. So I
Right.
want you to know that your description of your book does not sell it nearly as well as it needs to be sold, because for those of you in the audience, it is a incredible, muscular, sexy, thoughtful roller coaster ride about marriage, about the pain of a dream thwarted and a dream realized. It's about what we owe each other in a marriage. It is about so many things. It's also about this writer. It's meta. It's very meta, people. It's also about this writer wondering about his grandfather, and it is just, I just love it. And I'm not just saying that because I love you. I actually love this book. So I was really excited to talk to you about it.
I think,
So
I appreciate that. I have to say, I think it's my best one. I've written a bunch now.
you have, okay, so let me tell them about the ones you have written. Let me be the journalist here, right? Because there's a question at the end of it. So for those of you who don't know Darin Strauss, run out and buy all of his books from Chevalier Books.
This one first, please.
Do that. But really, all of your books they're rooted in the real, if not the historical. The Chang and Eng was Darin's first novel, and it explored the life of the very famous Siamese twins. And then his next book was The Real McCoy, about Kid McCoy, who was a real boxer and a grifter behind the term The Real McCoy. And then he had a contemporary novel, More Than It Hurts You, that wasn't historical, but it was centered around the rare condition of Munchausen by proxy. And then there was the absolutely exquisite Half a Life, a memoir about a fatal accident he was involved in when he was a teenager, which led to the death of a young girl he knew from school. Which, by the way, I'm still mad at you about that book, because you don't remember this, but I remember this very well, because I was writing Not by Accident at the time, which was my second book. It's a memoir. And you were like, you typical Darin, like, I don't know how you can write memoir. I'm never going to write a memoir. I could never write a memoir. And I, in my pomposity, said, yes, of course you can. Of course you can. I could never write a novel like you. And then, damn it, you turn around and you fucking kick ass. And you write this amazing, like, iconic work. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself, or behind myself. What I wanted to say was, the way you play and you bend fact to your will is brilliant and fascinating to me. And I'm wondering, this is the first big picture question I have for you. Tell me, what do you think our responsibility is as writers to truth when we're forming creative?
That's a really, first of all, thank you for all that fluff. It's very nice of you.
It's true.
Yeah, I haven't thought, you don't really think about how your books fit together. I'm sure you feel that way too, until someone tells you. So yeah, I didn't realize how similar they all were. I remember going out for an interview for my second book, and the guy was like, "This book is so much like your first book." And I had no idea he was right. Anyway, so yeah, I think we have a lot of responsibility to the truth. It just depends how you define truth. So in nonfiction, I think it's very important not to lie. I think part of the reason we're in the place we're in as a country is because of fake news, obviously. So, there's so much falsity in reporting, and it's impossible now to know what the truth is when you look at the different newspapers. I mean, it's so fascinating to me. If you'd go to, it's less so now, the Drudge has finally realized what Trump is, but up until like 6 months ago, if you checked out the Drudge Report and the Huffington Post on the same day, you would have no idea they're talking about the same country or the same time frame, because they're both aggregating news, but they're telling completely different stories. So when I write nonfiction, I try not to bend the truth. But when you're writing a novel, I think you have responsibility to a different kind of truth, which is a responsibility to honesty and a fair representation of how people are. So this book, I did make up a lot of things. You know, my grandfather, I told his story, and I told Lucille Ball's story, and I told those stories straight. Like I didn't mess with their facts. You know, I did a lot of research on Lucille, but then I felt like I couldn't, if it's fiction, I not only could, but had an obligation to invent stuff, because I really wanted to tell the story of Lucille Ball because I think she's an amazing woman.
Oh, it's just because you like redheads. It's okay.
And redheads, yes. Well, that's certainly true. But I wanted to, I feel like she is underappreciated for all of her sort of proto-feminist stuff. But I realized, you know, if you read a biography of her, they don't really give you a sense of what it's like to be Lucille Ball, because she's not writing it, and if you're a biographer, you have to stick to what you can prove. And so a novelist has a different responsibility, which is to sort of describe the texture of someone's life. So I thought, you know, if I do my job right, I can give a much fuller and truer account of what it would be like to be the most famous woman in the world than any of the biographies, which can tell you, you know, she had the equivalent of 85 million viewers a week, but not what that feels like, if that makes any sense.
Totally. But then, well, you also get into your grandfather's imagination and his longings, and your grandmother as well, which I thought was such a bold, empowering move for me as I'm working on something. I felt that as a writer, I was learning something from the process of the book. But let's just go back to the moment for those of our attendees who haven't read this book. It begins with a fascinating point of history that you found that your grandfather and Lucille Ball were actually in the same party thrown by our president's father. So can you tell a little bit more about how did that initiate the concept for the book, or how did that spark? How did the spark for the novel actually occur?
Well, I had a dream, and I woke up and I was like, this is going to be an awesome book. And I wrote it down, and then I woke up and forgot. And I thought, oh, I don't remember what I said, but I know my next book is written down. And I could barely read what I wrote, and it just said Lucille Ball and something else. And I thought it said like Lucille Ball and Papa Izzy. I was like, what the hell is that? And then I did some research and found out that there was this party thrown by Donald Trump's father, as you mentioned, where she was and he was. And so way back, you know, before Donald Trump, Trump's dad bought a bunch of land in New York's Coney Island. And among the things he bought was this beautiful old amusement park, this historic landmark. It was the first amusement park in the world. And it had this giant glass and steel building called the Cathedral of Fun, which was just a spectacular historic building. And so, of course, he wanted to tear it down and put up crappy housing. And so in order to manipulate the press, Trump's dad knew, like his son did, that the press is fascinated by celebrities. So he decided to throw a party where at the stroke of midnight, a bunch of celebrities threw a brick through this glass and steel building. And so everyone took pictures of the celebrities doing that, and no one bothered to get upset that this historic thing was destroyed. And so I thought, well, that's a cool opening, you know, the Trump family destroying something cool and old and glorious about this country, and celebrity being a part of it, and my grandfather being a part of it, and Lucille being a part of it. So I felt really lucky that I came across that. And so that was sort of the impetus for that. And, you know, I started writing the book a long time ago, so before even Trump was president. So I didn't know how resonant it would be, actually.
I wondered about that, yeah.
Yeah, and this book, because it's, you were very kind about, you know, the different things, but I think because it has got so many moving parts, it took me much longer to write this book than any other book. And it was initially, it's only 300 pages now, but initially it was 650 pages. I cut an entire storyline out. There was a whole contemporary story with me in the 90s and long hair and meeting a redhead at a cafe. So I cut that out because no one cared about that.
Story of my life. Anyway, go ahead. Yeah.
So that took a long time, but anyway, so, but you know, my grandfather, as you mentioned, wanted to be a writer, and I think that's why I became a writer, because he couldn't do it. It is a very typical immigrant story. His father came here from Russia with nothing. He was 13 years old. He didn't speak English. He had no money in his pocket. His brother was supposed to meet him at Ellis Island, and he didn't show up, the brother. So my great-grandfather, 13 years old, no English, walked into New York City alone, and somehow walked out 20 years later a millionaire, owning all these sky rises. He had this real estate empire. And he told his son, my grandfather, you have to take over the business. And my grandfather said, I want to be a poet. And he said, too bad, you're taking over the business. And because it was an old world family, he had to listen to the father. Yeah. So he did. And I always joke that my grandfather had this incredible talent. He's the only one in the country who was able to inherit like 10 sky rises in Manhattan and end up flat broke. So by the time I came along, there was no money left. I mean, my family was broke, but you know, when I was in college, my father lost his home to our home, my childhood home, to the bank. So, you know, that's how good at real estate we were. But, you know, so there should have been this fortune there. But he did, you know, rub elbows with all these famous New York real estate people. Like he did know Trump's father, my grandfather. Yeah. He knew LeFrak. I don't know if anyone there would know who LeFrak is, but he owns this big thing in Queens called LeFrak City. And another way my grandfather should have been a millionaire. LeFrak City is probably worth $200 million or more now. And LeFrak looked up to my grandfather and said, do you want to go in on this thing with me? And my grandfather said, sure. And he said, okay, it'll be my partner, but you can't bring in your brother. And my grandfather worked with his brother, my Uncle Harold. And so he said, no, I can't leave my brother out of it. So he said no to this hundreds of millions of dollar thing. And then years later, his brother Harold, who he jured the fortune for, ripped him off. And so that's the main reason my grandfather's broke, is because his brother stole everything from him. So that's in the book too.
You know, it is so interesting, this idea of family and what we owe each other, because he does, you know, your grandfather ends up leaving your grandmother for her best friend in real life. You've talked about, right? You've talked about that. But in this story, he's fascinated. He's obsessed with Lucille Ball because of a handful of encounters they have, right? This brief affair. And I find that that's a really interesting thing that you turn over and over in this narrative. And I wanted to ask you about that statement you made. It's half fiction, half memoir. What does that mean to you? And are these the kinds of questions where you had to go into fiction in order to find that truth that we were talking about earlier?
Yes, that's a great question. I think, so I always wanted to know the secret of my grandfather, because he did, as Sam mentioned, all these bad things. He left my grandmother. She was an alcoholic. And rather than get her help, he just abandoned her and never divorced her. And one of the saddest things I ever saw in real life was when my grandmother's deathbed. She hadn't been with my grandfather for 30 years, and she still talked about him as her husband. So she was talking to the nurses about him as if they were still married. And that's the way she carried on for the last 3 decades of her life. Just a hermit, a drunk who talked about her husband who was living with her best friend. And so there's something about him, and no one in my family ever blamed him or was mad at him. And I just thought, why did no one get angry at this guy?
Yeah.
And also my father was in real estate, and as my grandfather's business was crashing, he could have gone to my father and my uncle, who also was in real estate, and asked them for help, and he never did. And you know, my mother is very angry at her father-in-law, my grandfather, for never doing that. But my father's just like, you know, that was Papa. So I felt like I wanted to get to the heart of that, but I didn't know the truth really, because I can't talk to him. Just like I didn't know, you know, Lucille's marriage is fascinating too. Desi Arnaz cheated on her with 2 prostitutes, and the height of her fame, in a period where the country was so prudish that they couldn't show a married couple sleeping in the same bed. And as that's happening, the LA Confidential magazine broke the story that he was sleeping with prostitutes. And she was so famous that people didn't care. They just still watched the show. but I wanted to get into the truth of that marriage. And so I had to use fiction to sort of jump that last 20%. So if the book is 80% true, I felt like in order to make it really artful, I would have to jump that extra 20% using fiction. But it is mostly memoir and biography because, again, the stories about Lucille Ball are true. The stories about my grandfather and grandmother are true. I just had to add the sort of good stuff, the thoughts, feelings.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No.
One of the things that is so amazing about this book, all of you who will buy this book after we talk, and you will see for yourself, the voice you use here, Darin, is so incredible to me. It has so much authority. It is at once omniscient, and it's a felt presence. It has an attitude, and then it is able to get into the very interior of these characters. You know, you inhabit Lucille Ball's consciousness in a way that I have to say, as a woman, I believed. You know, sometimes when men write women, I don't quite buy it, but I bought it. I
was
really.
very sorry.
Oh no, and I thought, God damn him, how did he do that? Because you did it so well, and you did it also with your grandfather, and then you have these interstitial chapters that are definitely, you know, this very meta, the voice of the author. How did you come to that? How did you give yourself permission for that? I guess.
I guess it took me so long. So those interstitial chapters, it's like 13 pages of the book is me.
Yeah.
That was literally 300 pages. And so I just basically took the greatest hits compilation and tried to just make, I found 13 good pages in the 300. But yeah, I was really conscious of that. I felt like, you know, especially in the Me Too era, I really wanted to make sure that I captured, I don't want to just be another guy doing a bad job writing about women. So I worked really hard on that, you know. But I think you know me well enough to know that I'm actually just a woman in a straight man's body.
I do know you well enough.
Very,
about changing a tire on this. Anyway, go please.
I did change the tire, didn't I?
You did, but you were very nervous. Okay, I didn't get out of the car because I didn't want to emasculate you. So please,
right.
Go on. Sorry.
Yeah, that makes it harder to change the tire if there's a person sitting in the car, you know. But yeah, so anyway, so I really did work hard to get those voices right. And, you know, it's funny, you mentioned my memoir. I wrote that in a year, and this took like 6 years, this book. I don't know why it took so long, but I think I'm glad it did because I really think it is the best thing I've done. So I am very proud of it. And I think it's because it mixes all these things that I learned how to do. Like, I don't think I could have written Half a Life, my memoir, before I wrote it. But I don't think I could have written this without having written that, because this is, you know, contemporary fiction, historical fiction, and memoir, and those are all different muscles you have to work. Yeah. And so in order to sort of make it seem like one book was the challenge.
That's so interesting. You know, when you wrote Half a Life, I saw an interview you did with the New York Times where you said that now you were more conscious of kind of the subterranean motivations that propelled your first 3 novels. And then I felt in this book, you are very obviously staring history in the eye, and you're very, and your own fascinations and your own wonderings. I wondered, you know, because it is a very complex book. Were there times in those 6 years where you lost faith? And how do you keep going when you lose faith in a book?
That's such a good question. I mean, yeah. Well, you know how it is. And I'm looking here. Michelle Raphael writes, "Not by Accident" is my favorite memoir. It is a great book. You know how it is when you write a book and you've written a bunch yourself. I think you just have to convince yourself to keep going, because there's going to be a lot of times where you think, "Oh, this sucks." I mean, for me, it's a very split personality job. There are times when I think this is the best thing anyone's ever written. And then I'll go back and look at the same page the next day and I was like, what was I thinking? This is the worst thing anyone's ever written. But I think it's important to be able to do both those things because you have to be so cocky at certain points to go for it, to say to yourself, this has to be good. So I'm going to try the craziest metaphor I can try, or I'm going to have the best plot twist or whatever. You have to really convince yourself that you're good in order to go for it. But then also there are other times you have to be totally humble where you're editing and you have to say, this probably sucks. Let me look for all the bad stuff. I know a lot of writers who are good at the first part of thinking they're really awesome, but then they can't turn their pretty good first draft into a very good second draft because they can't see where they're not great. And so I think that's just all part of the process. And you have to recognize, I guess that's where having done it before. Tell me if this is true for you, but after having done it before, you can say, okay, I know that I feel this is not good, but I felt that before, so I'm just going to keep going. And eventually I know I can make it good. Even if it's not good, I know it's easier to make something bad better than to start from scratch.
Yeah. And also, I'm wondering, when do you let people into your process? You live, folks, his wife is also an incredible journalist and writer, Susanna Meadows. Do you share pages? How does that work for you?
We do, but I don't share them too early. I think the problem was this time I shared it too late because she said, "Oh, you got to cut that contemporary story," and if I had let her see it maybe 2 years before, I would have probably saved 18 months of work.
Mm-hmm.
And then the book would have come out before the pandemic, and I'd be talking to you in person, which would have been nicer. But
It would be so much nice. We'll get together after this whole thing's over. But
I hope so. But yeah, so I do. I think it's important to have. I mean, I teach, as you teach, writing, and I think one of the main things you get from writing classes is finding people who you can show stuff to, having people beyond the class who you trust and say, okay, I'll read your first drafts, you read my first drafts.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And yes, and it occurs to me that some books we just have to grow into. We just have to develop. Let me have a note here. There was a line. There was a line from the book where you're describing Lucy and Desi, and you say they will make their ideas of marriage into the universal idea of marriage. And it occurred to me that as a younger novelist, a man without the years of married life and 2 kids, you might not have been able to inhabit this story the way that you inhabit this now. So there is maybe something to maturity, maybe something to life experience.
I think that's the one benefit of being a writer of books as opposed to like a rock star or an actor, is that you get better and hopefully you're allowed to keep doing it. Because, yes. I was just thinking about the Beatles today. A friend and I are going to maybe try to pitch a podcast about music. And we were looking at the Beatles, and they did all their work before they were 30, which is incredible. I mean, they had solo careers and everything, but to be done with that at 30 is just such a weird thing. Because like, I didn't publish my first word till I was 30. So I think maturity is a strength. I think you lose in energy, you gain in skill.
Yeah.
So, but I'm going to turn the tables on you. Do you think that you would have written Not by Accident differently if you wrote it today?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, don't you feel that every book you write is kind of a snapshot of where you were in your development of life?
Yeah.
Not a bad thing. I mean, I wouldn't have written Not by Accident with the immediacy that maybe I wrote it. And frankly, there's a book that I've been working on for a very long time, as you know. And I've had, I've gotten really married in the interim, and I've had a child. I'm a stepmother to other children, and my life has expanded in a way that I never knew that it would. And I feel more a sense of responsibility to other people in the story than I did when I was just the lone gunslinger writing in my, does that make sense? You know,
it makes perfect sense. You know, it's funny. So you mentioned my book, More Than It Hurts You, which is about Munchausen by proxy.
yes.
And it's about a mother who is accused of hurting her child. And it's really a story about, I guess you'd call it today, white privilege. I didn't think of the term, you know, I didn't have that in mind, but it's about a white family where the mother is accused by a doctor of injuring her child on purpose. And so the doctor moves to take the baby away from the family, and the local press gets involved. And because the doctor's an African-American woman, and because the family is a white upper middle class family, the doctor is the one who gets ruined. But I bring it up because I don't know if I could have written that book after I wrote that book about parenthood, thinking, yeah, I'm a novelist, I could do whatever I want.
Yeah.
And I wrote it about this kid getting hurt. And I think I did a pretty good job capturing parenthood, but I don't know if I would have been able to read it enough to you know, and it's funny, the book did okay, but it got really good reviews and it didn't sell as well as the number of reviews would have indicated. And I didn't understand why at the time. And now I think maybe people just didn't want to read about a kid getting hurt, you know?
Maybe.
So, and then that when I realized that, I realized, oh yeah, I don't think I could have written that book now. So how can I expect people to read it, you know?
Right.
And I was anti-selling my book. I'm going to go through every book and tell you why you shouldn't buy it.
Just shut up and let me do the talking about your book.
Okay, yeah, that was our plan when I was young.
It was the whole plan. Listen, I think we better let people into this conversation. Maybe if there are questions, Teresa, do we have any questions that are burning desires from?
For sure. So I did want to let everyone know there's two ways to ask questions. You can drop them in the chat box, like I mentioned before, or if you'd like to ask it personally, you can raise your hand. There should be an icon at the bottom of your screen, in which case I'll see you and I'll unmute you. You can ask your question yourself. We don't have any questions quite yet. So what I'm going to do actually is use my privilege as host to ask the question first. I'm very curious about this because it seems like this is a question for both of you. You have experience in several writing mediums, from novels to memoirs to, you know, reporting. And I'm curious about, like, when you sit down at the table and you're about to write whatever genre or category you're going to write in, do you have to bring like a certain sense of responsibility, wear a certain kind of hat? Like, is your toolbox different for when you're writing something in one genre versus another?
That's a great question. Do you want to go first, Sam, or do you want me to go first?
No, you go first, then I'll pipe in.
That is a great question. I think they're kind of the same for me, because I feel like what I always try to do is have enough distance to tell the story in a way that is detached and entertaining. And to me, the difficulty of fiction is always, you know, with every step you ask yourself, does this make sense? Is the character compelling? Would this happen? And with nonfiction, you don't really have that, because you know it would make sense because it happened. If you pick a character like Lucille Ball, you don't worry if she's compelling, but you have different concerns, like how do I make it interesting, or how do I, you know, talk about stuff if I'm not sure exactly what happened. But so for me, when I teach nonfiction, I tell my students it's helpful sometimes to change the I to a she or a he, because, or they, I guess, because you want that distance. When you write about yourself, it's like, I walked into the room and then you have all this baggage, like, yeah, I'm such a nice guy, why isn't everyone nice to me? But if you say he walked into a room, then you can see that person
With that,
as other people see him. Yeah. Like, you know, like I'm seeing myself now in Zoom and I realize I'm old. Gray hair. I don't look like I think I look.
yeah, I know. That's called the Zoom effect. I was talking to my class about that just today, or just actually a couple days ago, that ever since Zoom, I'm obsessed with getting a facelift. Wouldn't I look better like this, you guys? Come on, really. It never bothered me before, but now I'm like, I got it. Anyway,
I keep thinking I should dye my hair. My wife would kill me. But
it was ridiculous. It's
no,
ridiculous.
it'd be ridiculous. It would be ridiculous.
But I want to answer this question because it's a great question, and we are free, I think, as writers relative to the genre we're writing in at the time. What I mean is that when I'm writing journalism, that work is circumscribed by fact. And so I'm very conscious of the fact that I'm not going to go outside the lines. I'm not going to make things look better just to tell the story. So but the impulse for storytelling is the same. We still want to make it interesting. We still want to make it engaging. We still want to have an emotional stake in it. So I have to ask myself, it's more a question of ordering, I guess, when I'm doing journalism, but we're always asking kind of the same questions. What does anybody want in this story? What's getting in the way of what they want? Those basic facts are true whether you're writing fiction or nonfiction. But I think for me, what was really exciting about reading this book is I thought, oh, I can give myself permission. In my creative nonfiction and fiction, I can give myself permission to make whatever the hell kinds of rules I want to. You said something in the book. At one point, Lucille says of her show, she says, "It doesn't matter. This world has its own rules, its own order and logic." And I thought, he's writing about the book. He's writing about writing the book there. Anyway.
Yeah, it's funny. That's why I never had trouble with it. I always just felt like if it's fiction, I'm just going to go for it. And so the article in the paper that is put out by the company that Sam works for, the LA Daily News, just did an article on the book, and the reporter was saying it was so weird that you wrote a sex scene with your grandfather. And it is weird, and it felt weird to do it, but I feel like, this is the thing that I always tell my nonfiction students. If you tell a story, you have to just go for it. So, because often in nonfiction, the story will be fairly good, and then they'll get to a part where you want them to tell something more, and they'll say, "Oh, I can't divulge that," or whatever.
Yeah.
And I feel like if you then don't tell a story, because if you say I'm going to write the story, you have to go all the way. And so I was writing this story, and I thought, this needs a sex scene right here. It's a story about a sexual affair. I can't skip that. So I had to sort of go for it, So I think, I forgot the beginning of the question, but.
That's all right, you answered it. What's the next question, Teresa?
Okay, so we have a question from Aparna, who's also actually been so kind as to drop a link to an LA Weekly write-up about the book by Michelle Raphael.
Yes, that was great. And Michelle is here, and that was really lovely of Michelle to do that. And I was very excited to see that.
So this is a question from Aparna, and it says, did this dive into an imagined relationship and affair change your perspective on infidelity and the marriages you see today?
That's a great question. It didn't really change. I think infidelity is really bad, so it didn't change my my take on it. The challenge really was when you're writing about your grandparents, you want to be respectful to them, and you want to portray them as they really were. And so I felt like it'd be easy to write about an affair if one of the spouses was boring or something, and so then the other spouse had to cheat or felt like he had to cheat or whatever because the marriage was so unhappy. But I felt like the challenge was to show these people as both complex and compelling and still make the affair believable. So I guess it gave me a sense of maybe the desperation of some people in a marriage, because the book is about obsession and fame in a way. So I think what happened is my grandfather was in a fairly happy marriage, and then in the book, and then came across the most glamorous figure he had ever met, and then couldn't go back to his real life because I think fame is warping in that way. And so I think his brush with fame warped him. I remember my editor said, this is a love story, but is it really love or is it just obsession? And I said, that is the question I want people to ask. I remember reading about the movie Broadcast News. And if you ever seen that movie, great movie, William Hurt said to the director, I don't really know what my character's motivation is here. I don't know if he actually likes this woman and is attracted to her, or is just using her to get ahead in his career. And James Brooks, the writer and director, said, play the question. And I think that was always, this really stuck with me. And so that's, I think sometimes good art plays the question where you don't have to give the straightest answer.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I just have to drop in a little bit of history, personal history on Darin about this brush with fame, because I remember, Darin, when Madonna sent you the note, how much she loved Chang and Eng. Carrie Fisher loved Chang and Eng. I think one day I was in New York and you couldn't meet me because you were meeting with
Elvis Presley?
No, shut up. You know, the guy who didn't he option you?
Oh, Gary Oldman.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. So I was lucky enough to have seen some famous people up close, and I was friendly with. I became very friendly with Carrie and stayed over her house. And I was friendly with Philip Seymour Hoffman, and so it's interesting. Two of the few famous people I knew died. Mm-hmm. And I think probably in both cases because of their fame, you know. And so I saw how damaging it was. I mean, Carrie was a very sad person. She was such a funny, warm, nice person, but she was screwed up by fame, you know. And I saw it, you know, when I stayed over her house. I just felt like she didn't have any real friends. She just had people who were sucking up to her. And I felt like at the end of Philip's life, that was true for him too. I first became friends with Philip in the early 90s when he was just a struggling actor, but by the end, I felt like some of his old friends had changed around him. And I thought, you know, everyone says famous people change, and they do, but I think it's in large part because the people around them changed so much. Philip was friends with a bunch of struggling actors, and by the end, when I would hang out with him and his friends who were actors, it was just like everyone wanted something from him. Even me, you know, I'm sure I would have loved to have written a movie for him or something. So I think it's just got to be hard to be around people who just want something from you all the time.
Well, I will try to keep my ambitions in check whenever we hang out from now on.
You need to get more famous friends. You live in LA. What are you doing? You know.
I know you know my backstory. You know my backstory. Anyway, more questions.
Yeah, I was going to say something, but no, I won't say it.
More questions, Teresa.
Okay, so it seems like we have a bit of a shy bunch today. We're not getting too many questions. So I'm going to monopolize the Q&A and ask another question that I have.
I want all my students who are now attending, you're all getting demerit points because you're not. Please, go ahead.
Okay, so my question is, so working at a bookstore, I get asked a lot to read people's books. And it's often, you know, customers or friends that I get to know pretty well. And to be honest, it's a bit scary for me to read the books of people that I know well, because it just feels like I'm opening Pandora's box into their brains. And so I'm curious, as a question again for both of you, of what is it like to read the work of someone that you know, and does it color your vision of the book at all, or do you have to keep yourself from coloring that vision? What is it like?
It helps if your friends are only other writers, so you're equally vicious with each other. Don't you feel, Darin? Don't you feel that that's true?
Yeah.
Just reading civilians' work, it would be a different thing.
Wait, what did you say was the last one?
But if we were just reading civilians' work, it would be a different thing. But you know, this body of friends we have, they're equally going through the process. We're all professionals at some level, so we're all vicious.
Yeah, I think you have to be honest with your friends and tell them, you know, if something doesn't work, because it's so much crueler to say this is great if it's not. but I think your question about, opening Pandora's box is interesting too, because I think a lot of people felt that with me with my memoir, because I had this secret in my life, basically. Like I had this, I mean, Sam mentioned, she said she wrote a memoir, and I said, I'm never going to write a memoir. I wasn't being facetious. I just buried this thing down so deep. I thought, I'm never going to tell anyone. I'm never going to write about it. So when people said they were going to write a memoir, I wasn't kidding. I thought, oh, I have nothing to write about, just because I thought I would never touch that.
Yeah.
So I think it might have been weird for people who knew me to read that, just because it was so personal and such a surprise. And I've had that sometimes too with people who I've read nonfiction of theirs, and I realize, oh, I didn't know this about them. And that's weird, because people in different guises. But I think Sam's right generally, that if you're friends, you're probably friends with people because you respect their brain in some way. So it would be strange if you had a great friend who was a writer, and then you read his or her work and you thought it was absolutely terrible. That would be hard, but I've never had that happen.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have a couple questions. It seems your thread of the merits has worked, Sam. We have a question from Claire, seconded by Kathleen, and the question is, was it a daunting task to write a story involving a family member? Did you worry about your family's input and potential judgment of this narrative?
Good question.
Yeah. There's a great Yiddish saying that says, a family is doomed if a writer is born into it. So I think, it's been a tough book for my dad to read, because about his father.
Yeah.
And so he told me he was reading, I read the scene where his father died. I wrote my grandfather's death scene. So he said that really was hard for him to read. And because he forget, because for me, by the end, it was like, oh yeah, this is a novel and that's my character. But my dad said I captured his father well. So it seemed to him like he was reading about his father dying in front of him. So that it's tough always. I mean, whenever you write about people, it's tough. And because I think you have to be honest. There's a book, You and I, about John Updike, where Nicholson Baker says he could never be as good a writer as John Updike, because John Updike is so mean to his wife when he writes about their marriage. And he said, I could never be that cruel. And so my stories wouldn't be as good, but my marriage would be better. So yeah, I guess you have to make those decisions. How far are you willing to go? Yeah. And I wouldn't go far in relationships I value. Like I would never write anything mean about my wife. I just feel like if there was a story about her, I just wouldn't tell it,
Well, there isn't, because she's perfect and you love her.
Yeah, she's great. So.
Yeah, and don't you find too that you never know what people are going to be upset about, really? I mean, you might have some general idea, but it's always the particulars. And like my mom I could write about my mom's alcoholism. I could write about her checkered past, but damn, if I called her house anything other than manufactured housing, if I called it a trailer, she was really upset. And that may sound silly, but it was a shame. There was a deep shame there somehow. And that just taught me that you never know, you really never know what you're treading on when you're dealing with people in your own life.
I think that's totally true. And I think what people are mad at in this book a little bit is they talk about my grandmother being an alcoholic, which I didn't think people, but I guess that's the same shame, that people are saying, wow, how could you let that out into the world? But if everyone in my family knew, and no one who's not in my family knew who she was, because she was a hermit. So what is, and actually I feel like for me, my grandmother's the secret hero of the story, because I realized as I wrote the book, how much angrier and angrier I got at my grandfather for having done this to my grandmother. So by the end, my grandmother sort of steals the book and takes over the narrative. And so I feel like I gave her a voice that she didn't have in her real life. I tried to anyway.
Isn't that the most wonderful thing, to be able to redeem these people that we love? I mean, I don't mean redeem in the sense of making them all perfect and shiny, but really acknowledge their existence and have their life live on in people who read about them through your work.
Do you feel like you do that with your mom?
I do, actually. I didn't realize that until after she died. And that's one of the things I think that's difficult about the work that I'm currently doing. I have to look at everything, and I want the picture to be complete, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. Yeah.
You can't, I think, but that's the way you make them lovable in a way. There are two quotes that I like about that. One comes from F. Scott Fitzgerald, and he said, if you start with an individual, you get a good type. If you start with a type, you get nothing.
Yeah.
So I feel like if you have to show a person in all her humanity, faults and non-faults. And then another one comes from Amy Hempel, who Sam and I both met, I think, at the same time.
Yeah.
When we met together we were students together at this thing called the New York State Summer Writers Program in the 90s, many years ago. And Amy said, devil on the page, angel to the reader. I think that's such a good piece of advice. If you write someone and all their flaws, we love that person because we're all flawed. If you write someone perfect, then we don't like that person because none of us are perfect. So the more flaws you can show, I mean, that's why somehow we all love Tony Soprano, who's the worst person ever to be on TV, probably.
Yeah.
So.
That's really great.
Awesome. I think we have one last question, and it sounds like the perfect question to close out this hour. It's from Amy Wallen. She writes, "Form has a brush with celebrity that was also a good story. Do you both feel that celebrity is what writers do or should strive for? And in addition to that question, what do you prefer, memoir or fiction?"
I don't know what she's talking about with the brush. The fact that I was almost a successful writer, is that what you're talking about, Amy Wallen? Okay, I'm not going to self-implicate here. I'll let Darin go first there.
I remember when I first met you, you promised you were going to set me up with Catherine Zeta-Jones, so I don't know what.
You were not rich enough for Catherine Zeta-Jones.
I was not ready for that, no.
Let's just say, Teresa, I used to run with a different crowd, okay? I used to run.
So what was the question? Should writers go for fame? No, I don't know if you should go for fame, but I think, I don't know, John Updike once said, the writer's responsibility is to be published.
Yes.
Nothing else. And I think there's something to that. You don't need a huge audience, but I think it really helps to have at least one or two readers, just because you write to get it out there. And so, and
you
I
write to connect, right? I mean, isn't that what we write to connect?
So I would love to be, it's not fame I'm chasing, but I want all my books to be read by as many people as possible, just because you want to redeem the work you do. So I don't know if it's fame, but I do think every writer chases readers, and I think that's okay, right? I mean, you don't want to sell out. You want to write a book you don't love. You want to write the book that you love, and then you want to hope people love it too.
That's true, and you never know where your story's going to land. You never know who it's going to be meaningful to. It's like this message in a bottle you kind of pitch out onto the ocean. Lots of times you do get feedback, especially now, but there are lots of other times you don't know. I mean, there are many hundreds of books that I have loved where I haven't written to the writer to tell them that I've loved it, that it's lived inside me. And I do want to say one thing about celebrity and writers. Two things, actually. We learned this about celebrity and writing at the New York State Summer Writers Institute, Darin. I think you were there one night when we were all going to dinner. The faculty was all going to dinner, and the at the institute, these people were the walking gods. It was Olympus at the New York State Summer Writers Institute. It was founded by William Kennedy, who wrote Ironweed, Pulitzer Prize winning novelist. We had Marilyn Robinson, Joyce Carol Oates, Russell Banks, Rick Moody. Come on, keep going. I mean, everybody in the American literati, Michael Ondaatje was there. The American literati, right, was the faculty. And one night we were going to a faculty dinner. We were walking in downtown Saratoga Springs, and in front of us were you know, Joyce Carol Oates was talking to Russell Banks, and you know, this kind of procession of the most famous writers in America, and nobody knew who the hell was walking down the street. It was just a bunch of old people, right? Here I am from LA, and the paparazzi is outside of the Ivy for any, you know, B-list celebrity. But no, the brain trust of American literature is walking down the street and nobody gives a shit.
Yes.
So that taught me a lot about fame and writing, being a writer.
But that, yeah, I was, you know, and that, I think that was, I had a goal that I wanted to teach there one day. And that, so when I was asked to teach there, that was a huge honor, you know.
Yeah.
But I think you make a really good point that it's, you know, so a teacher of ours who passed away, both of us were friendly with him after, this writer Lee K. Abbott. He used to say, the time before your book comes out is the calm before the calm. Because, you know, it's not a cultural, it's not the same thing as a TV show or whatever. You know, I mean,
it is to book nerds. I mean, to us book nerds who are gathered here tonight, those are our shining moments and our rock stars, right? But when we take the culture at large, no.
Yeah, I mean, what it takes to be considered a successful book is the numbers are very small compared to any other art form, and that's okay. You know, again, I don't think we should chase fame. I think we just want to have enough readers where we connect, as you say, and where we are allowed to keep doing it.
Right.
So
thank you both so much. I promise if you ever come into Chevalier's books, we'll promise to geek out that you guys have come into the store. I really want to say thank you to you two, and also to everyone who's joined us tonight for this past lovely, lovely hour. Again, I'm going to go ahead and drop the link to buy Queen of Tuesday online if that's your preferred method. Otherwise, you can always contact the bookstore at chevaliersbooks@gmail.com to reserve your copy. We have plenty. So make sure to do that. Anything, Samantha or Darin, you wanted to share before I take us home?
Just thank you. Just thank you to both of you for hosting me. And it's great for Chevaliers to do that. And Sam, it's great to see you as always. Thanks everybody for coming.
Okay. Ciao. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.